10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 291. Hey everybody, welcome into episode 291 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. We are getting close to the year here. There's a couple of episodes left after this one, and then we will sign off for 2021 and be back with you in early 2022. So hope you're all doing well out there. Thank you so much for tuning in yet again. If you are new to the show, I just want to let you know you can get an accompanying PDF and audio examples to every single one of these episodes by joining our Patreon. We are a listener-supported podcast, which means we do not have any ads on the show, and instead we rely on listeners like you to keep the show going, support us financially with a small monthly donation in return for a whole bunch of jazz education materials. So if that sounds good to you, like something you'd be interested in, then go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, go over there and you'll see all the options and you'll be able to get yourself signed up for instant access to all those materials. Again, that's 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners today. Wanted to give a shout out to one new $5 patron. Thank you to Tracy Lay, and thank you to Albert for editing your pledge up from $3 to $5. And of course, to all of the other 350 members we have over there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are the reason that this podcast keeps coming at you. And I really do appreciate that. Okay, let's jump into part 4 of our episodes on creative scale practicing. So last week we started talking about rhythm. And this week I want to take that concept a step further and start talking about 3 more exercises that get even more creative. So 2 of them are going to involve combining rhythmic creativity with interval creativity. And then the third one is going to show you how you can adapt your rhythmic practice to what scale you are practicing. Depending on how many notes are in the scale, we come up with a certain rhythmic scheme based off of that. All right, so let's dive right into example number 1. If you haven't tuned into the previous 3 episodes in this series, I suggest you go and do that because we're building off of the stuff that we've already talked about in parts 1, 2, and 3. Particularly, I want you to go and listen to episode number 3 because that's where we start talking about the real creative part of making these scales sustainable and something that's going to go beyond just fingerings and running up and down your instrument and turn into something that you actually have to think about and be creative with, which is what we want to do at the end of the day here. Okay, so the first exercise on your PDF, exercise number 1, is going to combine a rhythmic scheme, a very similar one that we talked about last week, with an interval scheme. So what I've done is I've taken a concert C major scale, and let me talk about the rhythmic scheme first. So what I'm doing is I'm playing 4 eighth notes, and then I'm resting for a beat and a half. So playing for 4 eighth notes, resting for 3 eighth notes, which is going to put our entrances all over the measure, right? They're going to be constantly shifting from on the beat to off the beats, and then going around to various on and off beats entrances in a measure of 4/4. Now, what I've combined it with is thirds going up, and then when I turn around and come down, now I'm actually playing fourths. So I'm combining a lot of stuff. I'm worrying about the rhythm, and I'm also thinking about thirds going up and fourths going down. So this is a really, really challenging exercise. And yes, I did write it out for you, but at the end of the day, I want you to try to do this without anything written down. And that's really the hard part of this exercise. So this is concert C major, rhythmic scheme of 4 eighth notes on, 3 eighth notes off, thirds on the way up, fourths on the way down. So you can hear how the two different aspects of that exercise, the rhythmic aspect and the intervallic aspect, really combine to create a pretty interesting layout. And if you could start to train your mind to think about these multiple things at once and do it on the fly, this will really, really pay off in your solos, because not only will your ears get used to it, your fingers will get used to it, and your brain will get used to sort of putting together all these different musical aspects, which after all is what makes a great solo. So if you can come up with your own exercise that's kind of like this, and remember, these exercises are not really meant as like verbatim things that you should go and practice. They're meant to just demonstrate concepts, things that maybe you should think about in your own practice time. All right, let's go on to exercise number 2. So I've done something a little bit different here. What I've done is I've taken a C whole tone scale, and I've arranged it with mostly quarter note triplets. So this is a really good example of something that is scale specific. So how many notes does a whole tone scale have? Well, it has 6. If you think about creating a scale that only contains whole steps, you get 6 of them before you get back to the root, half of the notes in the 12-note system. So it kind of makes sense to practice this using some form of a triplet, right? Because we can get from root to root in the course of one measure. So this is an example of something that I just came up with based off of tailoring something I'm practicing to the specific melodic device that I'm using. And this happens to be the whole tone scale. So you'll notice I play in the first measure right up the scale in quarter note triplets. And then in the third measure, I do the same thing, but then I actually descend the scale in the next measure. And then I finish out the exercise with the triad, an augmented triad. And I think that's a great way too, if you could start incorporating some of the vertical movement into your scale practice as well. That's another creative way to sort of cover both of your bases. So here's exercise number 2, based off of a C concert whole tone scale, using the rhythmic value of quarter note triplets. And if you're thinking that that exercise has no like discernible pattern to it, you'd be right. Basically what I'm doing is I'm mimicking, by writing down on a piece of paper, how I would practice this with that drum metronomic beat. And I'd have an idea in my head first. So I'd say, okay, I'm going to base this off of quarter note triplets and the C whole tone scale. And then I would just try to come up with interesting ways to almost improvise using that, try to come up with a cool exercise. But the whole time I am just thinking about those two aspects that I mentioned, a C whole tone scale and quarter note triplets. So that's an example of what I might play actually written down on paper. Okay, let's jump on to the third exercise. So this one, I'm using the rhythmic pattern of 4 eighth notes on, 2 off. So 4 eighth notes followed by a quarter rest. I'm using a C concert melodic minor scale. And what I call this exercise is progressive intervals. So what that means is I'm playing the root, then the second, then I'm coming back down to the root, playing the third, coming back down to the root, playing the fourth, coming back down to the root, playing the fifth, so on and so forth until I get out to a full octave. And I really like this exercise. I bet this is something that a lot of you have practiced before. If you've ever played classical etudes, especially on the saxophone, this is almost definitely something that you've encountered before. But the cool thing about this exercise is that if you're combining that rhythmic layout with the progressively wider intervals, it's actually really hard to keep track of what you left off on. So you play root 2, root 3, then you have that measure rest, and then when you come back in, you've got to go root 4, root 5, rest, root 6, root 7. Okay, and then you have to start working your way back down toward the progressively narrower intervals. So this is an example of something that's really mentally challenging. If you set out to play this without anything written down in front of you, you'd really have to concentrate to make sure you keep your place in that scale. So here is exercise number 3, melodic minor progressive intervals, 2 beats on, 1 beat off. So with that exercise, you're really practicing a lot, right? You're practicing your melodic minor scale. You're practicing a certain rhythmic scheme. And not only are you practicing just one interval, like we were doing in the thirds and the fourths, but you're practicing 7 different intervals, right? You're going from a major second all the way to an octave. And there's just so many great things about that exercise that are going to help you out both on your instrument and when it comes to improvisation. So that's going to about wrap up our series on creative scale practice. And I really hope that I've just given you a couple of ideas, maybe a new process to keep you interested in practicing your scales and turning the process into something that's more than just running your scales up and down, root to root. While that is an essential skill, we really shouldn't be practicing that forever. But we should be practicing our scales basically forever in some way. And I hope this gave you some new ideas. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, if you want to grab the PDF to this episode and all other 290 episodes that we've ever done, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We don't have any advertisers on this show, which means Patreon is the only way that we keep things coming at you. So go over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up today, and you will get instant access to every single episode that we've ever done over there. Thank you so much to all of our patrons for supporting us, and thank you to you for tuning in to all of these episodes that we've been putting out for a very long time at this point. All right, we'll see you next week with a brand new Lick of the Month episode. As always, I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy out there. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.